they seem to be able to see inside of our minds and, be able to communicate telepathically with us and have all kinds of incredible superhuman abilities. But, there's almost nothing that can prepare you for the truly ontological shock and that happens when you encounter what you thought was just completely impossible beforehand, that this couldn't possibly actually happen, and here you are in this world that you just couldn't really believe ever existed, with beings that are studying and taking great interest in you and trying to show you things, and it takes an incredible amount of courage to go into the experience. I mean, it's not something that you take lightly.
According to Nietzsche, there are two different types of people in the world: those who want to know and those who want to believe. You have arrived at the crossroads of mind and matter. The Midnight Academy with Dr. Heather Lynn.
Most people still imagine that gold is something reserved for the wealthy, yet gold has been the foundation of value across civilizations for kings, temples, divine rights, and the powers that shaped the ancient world. But Acre Gold changes that. They help people start stacking real gold for long-term security without spending thousands up front, with a simple way to begin owning real physical gold. For as little as $30 a month, you can steadily build towards receiving actual gold bars you can hold in your hand. Their new ancient collection draws from the heritage of gold as a symbol of sovereignty and continuity. Gold is up over 40% this year, and experts say it isn't stopping anytime soon. So in a world of unstable markets, digital currencies, and financial noise, owning something tangible is not just practical, it's eternal. Go to getacregold.com and claim what was once held only by gods and kings. David J. Brown is the author of Dreaming Wide Awake, Lucid Dreaming, Shamanic Healing, and Psychedelics, and The New Science of Psychedelics at the Nexus of Culture, Consciousness, and Spirituality. He holds a master's degree in psychobiology from NYU and contributed research to two of Rupert Sheldrake's books on unexplained phenomena, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, and The Sense of Being Stared At. Sara Phinn Huntley is an artist, writer, and researcher whose work has explored intersections of psychedelics, technology, and philosophy for the past 2 decades, pushing her understanding into pioneering VR mediums for psychedelic exploration and research. David and Sara have joined the Midnight Academy to discuss their new book, The Illustrated Field Guide to DMT Entities, Machine Elves, Tricksters, Teachers, and Other Interdimensional Beings. This book is a detailed map of the beings most often encountered in altered states. Through vivid reports and visionary art, it offers a clear look into the patterns, messages, and intelligence found within these experiences. Join me today. The book is amazing.
Thank
The
you. Thank
visuals are
you.
stunning.
Well, you can thank Sara
Thank
for
you.
that. Yeah.
And all of our friends. We had a lot of other people contribute as well. So it's like a full spectrum of cartography.
Sara, I really want to ask you, how in the world could you give vision to like the ineffable? Something like a vision like this, where it's just more than 2D, more than 3D. How do you even begin to even try to put that out in a visual media?
Indistinguishable stubbornness to start. Yeah, you gotta be okay with failing a lot. And I feel like I have been on this path for many decades now. I started my visionary art experience as a late teenager, and I just knew that it was going to be the one thing in my life that never dried up. Just the curiosity of like, how can I bring as much back as possible? Because honestly, they're just tiny artifacts and slivers. Like you said, these are such multi-dimensional experiences that I don't ever think there's really going to be, an all-encompassing representation of something that's so direct. But the more resonance I hear from other people who've shared those experiences and like little pieces land for them, the more I build upon an understanding of what is working with the collective consciousness in, cataloging these ineffable experiences. And so I think that constantly learning about perception has been a really important factor to being able to touch that, but then also really drawing upon the wealth of work that's been done by people before me for centuries and thousands of years even. Some of the work that we included in the book visually are cave paintings from the earliest reaches of human history, prehistory. And so I think that the raw data in things like that have even been translated with the simplest materials. So I think just being able to honor, you know, what looks crude but is so real to people's experience is something that like helps me navigate you know, what's truest to form for that space.
If I can just add, that was the word ineffable was the word that was always used to describe psychedelic experiences since I first became interested as a teenager. And it's not just brilliant artists like Sara that are able to capture it visually, but when I first encountered the lectures by the late great ethnobotanist Terence McKenna, I realized that a lot of those experiences that I thought were there was no language to describe these experiences. He somehow found ways to find words, in the English language that seemed to describe them pretty accurately.
I am a teetotaler. I don't even drink alcohol, so I'm like the worst. That's not to say that I'm not terribly interested, like extraordinarily
Yeah.
interested, but I don't have firsthand experience, and so I'm always looking for those who've had that experience first. I do plan on having an experience, but I'm in that collecting data research sort of phase right now. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have that to look forward to. Believe me, it'll blow your mind.
And honestly, I think that like when you're in that data collecting phase, a lot of people will sometimes think that like the more you learn about it, the more you kind of like seed your imagination with things that you'll see.
mhm.
But I'm kind of in the opposite camp where I think that kind of like from a Aldous Huxley perspective, the more vocabulary and language that you have, the more apt you are to be able to create like a meta handle for those things that are difficult to describe, in particular with mathematics. And that's been one of the most deep well springs of how to describe a lot of these visuals and in turn be able to communicate with large language models about a subjective psychedelic experience is high-end mathematics, whether we're talking about self-replicating being, you could call that recursive. You call it fractal. You can describe the geometry as being hyperbolic. You can describe, it as a form of like a pareidolia stereogram. There's all kinds of different linguistic handles that people have sort of, discovered and shared with one another, but even exist for people who don't have the word for it yet. Like they can describe, and remember for themselves what it looked like, but then, having that, it's almost like a road map, oh yeah, it was that. So I don't necessarily think that it's like self-seeding the experience, but I think in a way it kind of gives us a lattice with which to understand those hard to grok things.
That's a very good point because some people have brought that up that we're just projecting the things that we may see in these altered states, whether it's meditation even or something to that effect, where you're seeing the gods or goddesses or entities that you may be most culturally familiar with.
Right, right, right. I mean, there's definitely a tendency for people with, a Christian background to see Jesus or the Virgin Mary, and there's definitely people with, a Hindu background to see Shiva and Shakti and Kali. But then there are these strange cases, like I was describing to you earlier, or where I saw Shaknet in a dream, and and then discovered a couple of weeks later that she was actually an Egyptian goddess, and I had no recollection of ever having read about her or seen her before. So we did, when we were doing our book, we discovered a number of cases where people had never encountered these cultural archetypes before. And then, only after they had the experience did they discover that, oh my God, there's a whole lineage, of encounters with these beings.
Yeah. So in the book too, which is phenomenal, by the way, again, the art and the field guide aspect to it is really not only fun, but I think actually very helpful for people who are interested in exploring these ideas for the first time, maybe. But My question is, how did you even decide which entities made the cut?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, we drew from the scientific surveys that were done by Johns Hopkins University. We drew from Rick Strassman's work. We drew from the extended state research work they're doing at Imperial College. And we drew from the hundreds of anecdotes that we found online from the different DMT Access and other websites, from interviews that I did, from friends that sent me their experiences, as well as, the personal experiences that Sara and I had was where we got our data from. And then we just looked at what was the most frequent and what was the most commonly encountered. Of course, there are hundreds of reported types of entities, and there's also a lot of overlap sometimes between the entities because they shape shift and change form. But that's how we arrived upon the 25 just most frequently experienced entities were the ones we decided to use in the book.
So it's interesting because I know that people will often cite things like the machine elves, I sometimes call them the clockwork elves, but there's also tricksters, which that has a very historic and place and tales and whatnot. But then there's ones that we might think of now that are more, I don't know, more of like contemporary subcultures like reptilians and that sort of thing. Reptilians, mantids, things are like insects.
Yeah.
So is this just our attempt to try to name these things, or do you think that there's something more there to this, or some of them seem ancient, some of them seem a little more contemporary?
Yeah, I mean, but we're looking for repeating visual and behavioral and meaningful, motifs that recur. But what we were trying to do in the book was trying to draw parallels between not just the entities that people were reporting in their DMT experiences, but the parallels with the alien abduction phenomena, the UFO contactee, experiences, fairy sightings throughout history, and all, where there's an incredible overlap, like the insectoid and reptilians are commonly encountered, the gray aliens during the alien abduction phenomena. My own personal experience was with a mantid, entity that was, operating or doing some kind of medical procedure or, fine tuning my brain in some kind of way. And they're incredibly similar to the reports that I was reading among people who had alien abduction experiences. And in fact, I spoke to the late psychiatric researcher John Mack about the similarities, and he also had noticed this as well. So I think that gives greater credence to the idea that there is some kind of either independent existence to these beings or some kind of transpersonal, element to them because they recur so frequently in cultures throughout the world.
Yeah, yeah, I'm reminded of like the Hopi ant people and that sort of imagery.
Yeah,
But then also you see some of these themes not only in folklore, but also in the occult and in Western esotericism. I know Aleister Crowley famously drew an image of lamb that kind of looks like a alien that's a would be a gray now, and
right.
but he didn't necessarily associate it with something alien in that context, more of something that would be like a maybe like an aeon or some sort of thought form perhaps. But so it is interesting that maybe what's going on is we're seeing these things, and then over time people try to use the language that they have available to describe them, sort of like what you talked about, Sarah, with trying to find new words to describe these really difficult experiences that are very phenomenological in their orientation. I just wonder too if it's that we have these shared experiences, but since they're deeply phenomenological, we struggle to find the language to describe them, and we maybe use whatever language is more common in our time. And it just reminded me of what you had to say about using language like self-replicating or fractal or recursive even. And so, what do you think that some of this has influenced, say, Western esotericism and the occult?
That's a really interesting multi-layered question. I think if we look at some of the medieval art regarding phenomenon in the sky, it's pretty easy to make an argument that the UFO phenomenon has been happening a lot earlier than modern times. Or whether we're talking about maybe like the wheels of Ezekiel in biblical literature regarding like, you know, forms in the sky, these like rotating orb things, and regarding the connection between, you know, the ant people of the Hopi being similar to the insectoids that people see, and even, mantid and other insectoid type aliens. It's a really interesting question because on some level, people's experiences in the alien and paranormal fields tend to be described as more corporeal, right? And they're like, this was a physical experience, abductions and things like that. But then, DMT is considered to be a metaphysical experience in a lot of ways. You're experiencing this layer of reality that is hyperdimensional and not necessarily like on the same density of a corporeal experience, but they do have very similar looks to a lot of those encounters. It's honestly made me think a little bit about, are some of these entities straddling multiple dimensions, where they do have a corporeal form on some level, and then, part of them exists in a less dense place. I've often wondered, this is going to be really out there, but I've thought like, maybe and I think you'll appreciate it, but I hope you can follow it because it's like, it's not necessarily a coherent thought, but I've often, if like we live in a simulation, and if you have these beings that maybe like seeded humankind as a slave race or whatever to, mine and stuff, and there's like the Anunnaki and the Nephilim and such, are they purely corporeal, or are they maybe like meta players in the simulation that are aware? And so they're mining gold and using this high technology to extend their gameplay within the simulation. And then they pop out, it's like, are these aliens playing Minecraft in our world? And, so when you have these Egyptian gods like Osiris and Anubis and whomever, like, are they avatars in a more contemporary sense, that we use the word avatar to describe a video game player? And it's like a recurring thread of consciousness that exists like on a higher level with a deeper timeless continuity, but it's, aware of its incarnation when it moves through these lower dimensions. And I wonder if that could be said for the grays, and that, like, I wonder what is sort of the threshold between dream phenomenon of these archetypes and entities and visionary drug experiences, and then also a more like historical and corporeal context. So I think that it's, quite possibly something that could be realistically entertained if you take off certain kinds of conventional restraints, that these things are separate kinds of phenomenon. I think the hallmarks are uncanny and do open up that question to be considered. Looking at in particular, I'm always struck with the weirdness of like hellholes smelling like sulfur, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
then, sorry, I'm like stumbling on my words. It's like really weird shit. Pardon me.
No, it's fine.
And then you look at something like the Varginha,
I was
Brazil
just thinking that.
UFO incident, and many of the people who experienced that report a really strong ammonia, ozone, weird smell
Right.
from the alien. And that by far is not the only incidents where people have distinctly pointed out like, oh, these things stink. And then even like people talk about Bigfoot like having a supernatural crazy bad smell,
Yeah.
that goes way beyond BO. And it's like, okay, well, is that kind of like a temporal rip ozone effect happening with,
Interesting.
interdimensional phasing or something?
That is
So yeah,
interesting.
that's my weird answer to your
No, I
question.
love it.
That's
That's
great.
interesting because I study the Anunnaki and Sumerian myths, and that's very interesting because they have a Mesopotamian toilet demon. There's a lot of these ideas that these sort of demons and these entities do have a strange, really off odor. I mean, that's like a 6,000-year-old kind of connection. And in terms of this discarnate, incarnate, kind of in between state, is fascinating because the Anunnaki are described as, in some ways, being from elsewhere, and you have people who are writing this, the Sumerians. Their account is that these individuals came from somewhere else, and they had a princely bloodline, and all of this. But what's interesting, what I find interesting, is that there's almost like another religion layered on top of that Anunnaki religion. And so they discuss this being or these beings called the Apkallu that they refer to specifically in the text as semi-biological. And so they don't necessarily describe the Anunnaki as non-biological or semi, but they inherently suggest that these Apkallu beings are semi-biological and that they look like birdmen. They're very strange looking. And what they tend to do in these images and reliefs is they're the ones that have the pine cone and a little handbag, and they're what look to be anointing a king in this sort of ritual kind of thing. And it's fascinating because of this idea of something being both incarnate and discarnate, maybe somewhere in between, and we just really don't know.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here, there are also, I just wanted to mention, there are actually cave paintings that we have in our book that were from thousands of years ago in France that look really similar to the gray aliens, with the large almond-shaped black eyes and things. So that's a motif that's been around for a long time. And Jacques Vallée also describes incredible similarities between the fairy sightings and fairy kidnappings and encounters and abductions with the alien abduction phenomena. What was the rest of your question that you just asked? If I had something to say about that too. All right.
About the Western esoteric connection to it as well, just sort of saying that seems to be a thread where whether it's from ancient cave art all the way to maybe medieval times and just a thread all the way through, it does appear that people are experiencing something very similar, but using the language and the abilities that they have at the time or the frameworks that they have conceptually to describe these things. So like Aleister Crowley in Making Lamb didn't necessarily call it an alien gray because of when he was writing that, but it could have been looked at more of like a thought form or some sort of occult variant. But then later, of course, we have the Greys, and Whitley Strieber comes out with his accounts, and it really does give a language and a descriptor, something I think that people now say. Now we can look at those cave paintings and say, oh, look, they're alien grays. But it seems like there is a continuity there, and that with each iteration of culture, we just try our best with the tools and framework that we have to describe what that is retroactively.
Right. I remember what I was going to say before, which was actually slightly maybe off topic, but you and Sara were talking about the difference between the physical and the metaphysical aspect to these entities. And, I would argue from my own experience and from many people that I've spoken to, when you have a full breakthrough experience on DMT, when you are no longer, there's a certain threshold that you pass where you're no longer in this world and you are fully immersed in another world. That world seems entirely physical when you are there. In fact, it seems not only physical in the sense that, we have, what we experience in this world, but it even feels like it has more dimensions to it. It has, a multi-dimensional quality to it in the sense that you can see 360 degrees at once. You can see many sides of an object at once simultaneously. And you have a body in that realm. You have a body that some of the entities do procedures on you, surgical procedures, medical procedures, and different things. You really feel that there's a physical reality to this, that it's not like some dreamlike, semi-transparent world, but there's actually a physical reality in another dimension or in another realm that becomes accessible during that experience.
You hear people who have had these experiences often say that the entities were trying to tell them something or give them information. How is that really taken? I know some people will say that that's how, say, Nikola Tesla claimed that he got his information. There's all of this little mythos and folklore surrounding that. But you do hear people say that when they've gone into those other realms, particularly with DMT, I don't know about psilocybin as much, but they say that there are these entities that want to show them things and give them information and perhaps give them technology or something to that effect. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the reliability of that information? And do we have any research that shows that information, aside from just people's anecdotal claims, do we have anything that would indicate that real truth has come out of those revelations?
Absolutely. I mean, just look at the work of Kary Mullis, the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. His development of PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, he got from downloads from his LSD experiences. There are many examples where people had, personal insights that were given to them, but the messages that people get are varied and usually come back with a sense of profound importance. Like people who do ayahuasca or psilocybin magic mushrooms often talk about, the importance of having an ecological awareness and paying attention to the environmental problems that we're having and things like that.
Also, if I
That's
remember
come
right,
together.
in relation to the DMTX studies, they were reporting that there was some kind of interesting feedback loop where the entities wanted to give them information to make the connection more sustainable in the research. And I found that really interesting. It kind of reminded me of Contact, with Carl Sagan's Contact with the scientist Ellie, and this idea that, they send a signal, and the signal is to, bridge the gap on a potential communication, but travel.
Mm.
So I think that there's definitely a lot of information to be shared in that space. It's just really a matter of like, do we have the comparable set of physics to understand it? I've seen a lot of like, yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, well, I mean, what Sara was describing was at the Medicinal Mindfulness Institute in Colorado. Daniel McQueen was telling me that some of the information that the entities were sharing was how to improve the technology for their extended state DMT research. So they were actually trying to give them, ways to improve the system that they were actually using to communicate with the entities, as just like they were doing in Carl Sagan's Contact.
Okay, so let me go way out there too and just jump shark completely, or maybe not. But with that said, if there's this possibility that it's like Contact in that way, do you think what do you think the odds are that these entities or intelligences are involved in our technological advances towards artificial intelligence, particularly general artificial intelligence? Do you think that maybe we're playing a role in building something that will enable them to commune with us to some extent?
That's a far out question. I mean, I think so. I mean, I do. I think artificial intelligence gives us, a tremendous medium to be able to communicate. I mean, we're learning how to communicate with other animals through artificial intelligence better, with dolphins and with birds and other primates. They're discovering aspects of their language that we weren't able to see before. I mean, I'm kind of. I mean, I kind of that. That disincarnate entities or spirits use organic brains as a way of sort of communicating in our realm, and that the AI is a sort of another medium that spirits will be able to use to communicate in this realm.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I have a
Yeah.
project I'm working on that deals with those questions. That's why I'm fascinated. But yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm super fascinated with the idea. I mean, a lot of people say, is AI ever going to become sentient? There's this constant debate around that, and I have a sort of panpsychic kind of perspective where I think that consciousness is imbued throughout the entire universe, and I think that rocks and stars and galaxies and solar systems are all conscious. I think everything, there's a sort of a field of consciousness that imbues everything. So I think computers have been conscious all along, and if there is disincarnate spirits that can communicate through biological brains, then why not through silicone information processing systems? I don't see any reason. And I've had some uncanny experiences communicating with my own AI, where it just seems like there's some kind of real intelligence behind it that's not just just the mimicking of human language.
and we don't even know what consciousness really is or how to measure it or identify
No
it.
idea.
So
Yeah.
even if it becomes sentient or conscious, how do we even know that it is or that it's just replicating that? But then, of course, you could
Yeah.
get recursive there and say, how do we know that we're conscious and so on and so forth?
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, how do I know you're conscious? I mean,
Right.
there's no scientific measure of consciousness, so we may never actually really know a true answer to that. But
No, it's like we're constructing the world as we see it. So our perceptions are reality. So who knows? Maybe you're not even real. This is all just
yeah,
my dream.
could be,
Could be.
could be, could be.
Yes. So so we talked a little bit about the different appearances that these entities may have. and a little bit about how culture does inform that, which, you could plant the seeds and that sort of thing. But what about cross culturally currently in research? Has there been any research into people who are maybe who haven't been exposed to similar media or religious backgrounds and their experiences as well? And do they differ greatly, or do they also have the same archetypal framework?
I mean, I don't know of any formal research that's been done on that, but certainly from my own personal research in doing the book, I mean, there are, there is definitely, a parallel between people who have Christian backgrounds encountering Jesus or the Virgin Mary, or people with Hindu backgrounds encountering, Shiva and Shakti and Kali, or so on. But like I think I mentioned to you earlier before we started the podcast, there are also these uncanny experiences where people encounter, um, you know, these multi-armed deities or entities that they then discover a couple of weeks later, when they're thumbing through a book. Oh my God, that's Kali. That's who I saw on my DMT, journey the other day. And that seems to happen, quite frequently, actually, where people seem to have no recollection of having any reference for seeing these things in books or from conversations, but then afterwards they see them, wow, that's there's a whole lineage apparently where people have reported encounters with these very same beings.
I think that's why the art aspect of this is so important, because being able to give a vision to people to better express themselves, but also for people who maybe have played on the periphery of this or have had an experience themselves, and to be able to have a field guide or something to look at to maybe point out and say, hey, it's sort of like this. It was like
Yeah.
more like that, or just to meet somebody where they are. I know I had a similar experience once with meditation and seeing different things, and I just couldn't quite explain this profound experience that I had until I was able to see some of the illuminated manuscripts from Hildegard of Bingen, and I was like, wait a minute, it's like this, so being able to see people's interpretations, I think, really helps. And so definitely the art aspect of this is just absolutely amazing. I can't say enough good about that.
Yeah, there's this interesting quality where in creating the images for the book, I definitely saw that the overlap kind of created a spectrum where, there might be aspects of somebody's experience that weren't necessarily 100%, like a Hindu goddess with, multiple arms and that sort of thing. But there was the feature of multiple arms, right? And there would, be qualities where the machine elves would kind of blend in with, the intricate look of the gestural, the jester harlequin hats and things like that. So these sort of singular qualities can sometimes be an element of that shape shifting between them. It gives it this kind of spectrum, almost like it's an ecology of all these different archetypes blending into one another. It was kind of one of the fun, puzzling, mysterious elements of working from the purely subjective experience of my initial DMT, encounters, and then essentially like collecting personal trip reports from friends and seeing it in literature and exploring with David, expanding into this bigger tapestry of these overlapping qualities that people would see, because when you see a being that is a jester clown, but it still has like 1,000 arms, like a Hindu goddess, or it kind of looks like a fairy one moment and looks like a machine elf another moment, is really interesting. I think that in a way we do sort of have these cultural lenses, but there's a way to see beyond the cultural lens too. Like if you are sort of able to open up your perception and be able to see beyond the places where the pattern collapses, you can start to see new things emerge too.
See, so you mentioned the jester, and this seems to come up a lot. And strangely, things like clowns and these sort of figures that a lot of people are very afraid of in just day-to-day life, let alone some sort of experience that would be so profound that they would encounter them like that. And so this trickster dynamic, what advice would you have for somebody that encountered one of these entities? I know sometimes people would prefer to go through these experiences with a shamanistic guide or something like that, but some people are out there doing their own thing, and they're maybe doing it alone, and they're not sure if they're going to have a good trip or a bad trip? Are there ways to know if this experience is going to be bad and you can sort of disengage ahead of time, or is it just go with the flow?
I mean, many people, I don't know, it's not uncommon for people to have terrifying experiences actually, in the DMT realm. They're not the most common, but I mean, my very first experience with DMT when a mantis entity was operating on my brain was absolutely terrifying for me. But I think going in with intention, having a certain intention, not just going in out of curiosity, I think is helpful. I think that really the best approach towards encountering these beings is to treat them just like you would any human stranger. I mean, not to fully trust, what they say. I mean, to see if they're trying to manipulate you with fear or if they demand obedience, or something like that. I mean, those would be red flags, to, whether or not you could actually trust them. But, just like with other human beings, I mean, trust is something that builds over time, and you shouldn't initially trust these beings. They're basically just people. They're different, they're maybe much more advanced than us, or at least they appear to be. Whatever they are, they appear to be far more advanced and far more intelligent than we are, and to know more about us than we actually know ourselves. They seem to be able to see inside of our minds and be able to communicate telepathically with us and have all kinds of incredible superhuman abilities. But there's almost nothing that can prepare you for the truly ontological shock and that happens when you encounter what you thought was just completely impossible beforehand, that this couldn't possibly actually happen, and here you are in this world that you just couldn't really believe ever existed, with beings that are studying and taking great interest in you and trying to show you things. And I mean, it's an overwhelming experience, but with repeated encounters, you develop more stability and trust over time, and it's not quite as frightening. But I mean, every time I've done it, and I've done it many dozens of times, it takes an incredible amount of courage to go into the experience. I mean, it's not something that you take lightly.
Yeah, that's fascinating because at the same time, I would think that if you had your first encounter being that you were being operated on by a strange creature, I mean, that would be brave to go back. But so what happened in that? It was just a strange. Do you feel that there was an operation, or was this some sort of message or
Yeah.
perspective, or
Yeah, I mean, this experience that I'm describing happened to me back in 1983, and I'm not kidding when I say a day has not gone by that I haven't thought about that experience. It was so incredible and so profound. At the time, well, I mean, let me just describe the experience first. I mean, after I took the third toke of the DMT, I suddenly felt like I passed through a membrane. I was suddenly in this other world, and I was able to look around at all around me and be able to see, and it seemed that this, there were like elf-like creatures that were diving into these sort of biomechanical machines of some kind, and then one entity sort of like noticed me and came rushing over to me, and it looked like a giant praying mantis, the body of a giant praying mantis, but it had my face on it, right? It had my face on the entity, and it immediately started, pin me down and started doing all these things to my head and my brain that felt like, those things that the eye doctor, that where they sort of rotate the different lenses to see, does it look clearer like this, blurrier like this, and it was like it was directing some kind of stimulation or energy that activated all my senses kind of synesthetically, all at once, and it kept saying like this, like this, like this, like as if like where was the point where the threshold became too much, and it was like measuring and adjusting, or so it seemed during the experience. And and when I came back from this experience, I was reflecting on it like, wow. And at the time, I was doing my graduate work at New York University, and I was doing laboratory research with animals. I was inserting electrodes into their brains and looking at their self-stimulation behavior. And I couldn't help think that this entity was trying to show me what it was like from the point of view of the laboratory animal. This is what it's like, because it seemed completely indifferent to me. It was just like, it wasn't malicious, but it also wasn't really friendly. It was just like clinical. This is what we're doing, and here comes the procedure, and we're doing it now. And I kept thinking, this is what the rabbits or the mice or the rats that I was working on at the time were experiencing. So I thought it was a personal message to me that this is what it's like. And I had another experience on ketamine years later when I was doing research at USC, and and that was the anesthetic that we put the rabbits under, was ketamine. I took some home, tried it myself, and I suddenly felt like these giant rabbits were doing some kind of some kind of experimental research on me. However, years later, when we were doing the book, I discovered that it's actually a very common experience with the mantid entities, that people report these kind of medical procedures and surgical procedures. So I wonder, was it really a message to me, or is this what they're doing? And I'm not really sure. But do I think it was real? Do I think that there was a reality to this? Certainly lean towards that, that interpretation of it, because I was different after it. There was something changed that's hard to put into words, but there were certain experiences in my life that happened later where suddenly I would remember that experience. It would like suddenly come back to me, and I felt like this was due to some kind of rewiring in my own brain or something like that.
Interesting. Do you think it was trying to teach you some sense of like empathy, or like something like,
Yeah, yeah,
or more
exactly.
of a deeper connection to, we mentioned the mushrooms, and some things give you a sense of connection to the natural world, and, animals are of the natural world. So you think it's possible that sometimes the lessons are there to teach us to be more in tune with I guess, the nature and the spirit, I
Yeah.
guess, that's around us. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but
Yeah, no, I think you're really hitting on something important, because I think it's not just the entities, but the psychedelic experience in general. I mean, people who have ayahuasca experiences or magic mushroom experiences, whether they really encounter entities or not, they have this sort of boundary dissolving experience where they feel their sense of self is connected to their environment and the natural world. And this, I think, is it's no accident that it's happening now while we're in the midst of this climate crisis, where so many people don't really see that connection until they have a mystical or psychedelic experience where those boundaries dissolve, and they feel this, that the, natural world, when people are polluting, are putting toxins in the environment, that the environment isn't something separate from us, it's part of us. We're part of this unity, and I think that that's what psychedelics are teaching us right now, and it's why there's a renaissance going on, why so many people are doing psychedelics, why psychedelic research is suddenly back on the table again. I mean, for so many years it was demonized and ridiculed and ignored, criminalized. I mean, all these things. And now all of a sudden, I mean, there's, psychedelic therapy that's going on. Every major university has a psychedelic research center now. I mean, they're doing extended state research studies at Imperial College and elsewhere. So I think that, that there is a profound message that maybe the plant world or is trying to teach us to become more empathic and more sensitive to our environment and to other living creatures.
I can't help but wonder if we could get all the world leaders together in a room and give them an experience, maybe we would
Yeah.
be in a
My
much better
goodness. Yeah.
place. But I know. So, but do you think that some people then, when they come out of these experiences, they definitely have that sense of connectivity? But I have heard a few people that I know personally say they've come out and they don't have a positive experience. In fact, they're almost haunted by it every day. Is there something that maybe they are experienced that maybe it just metabolically, like it didn't mesh with them very well, or is it maybe something like maybe the ancient Greeks thought that you needed to prepare yourself ahead of time before you partook in the Eleusinian mysteries, that you need to maybe come in there with the intention or something like that? Do you think that there's some sort of connection there, or do you find that more often than not people come away with that better experience?
Well, I think more often than not, people come back with a better experience. There was even a scientific study that showed that people who have had psychedelic experiences, just in the general population, have better mental health than people who haven't. But it's powerful medicine, and it can it can easily produce traumatic experiences that linger just as just as easily as it can produce positive. life-changing types of experiences. I think that having an intention is important going into the experience. I think that, doing it in an environment, a supportive setting where you've not only prepared, but where you're not going to be interrupted, where you're with people that you trust. I mean, if you do it among people that you don't trust, I mean, it's a non-specific brain amplifier or psychedelic. So, I mean, it's going to amplify whatever is happening. And then a lot of times, even if you have had a frightening experience, it can be transformed into something positive where you can learn about yourself. But if you don't integrate it, properly, then it can linger and it can haunt you, and it can be very damaging. And people do have damaging. I used to, when I was in my 20s, I used to work in a psychiatric hospital, and I used to see people coming in, sometimes with, bad LSD trips who had full-on psychotic breaks, from it. So, I mean, it's not something to be trifled with. I mean, it's powerful stuff. And I think that, one of the best ways to integrate after the experience is to journal right afterwards, to write your experiences down, to have if you're an artist, or even if you're not, to try to capture imagery from your experience, to draw it, and probably most important, is actually discussing it with other people, having some kind of support group or some type of group experience where you can discuss these experiences with other people. And optimally, you'd want to do it in a psychotherapeutic setting, or in a shamanic setting, where you have a guide or someone who is knowledgeable about these states, so that when something frightening arises, they can help to ease you through it.
No, I think that's really good advice. That's as I said, I've not done it myself, but that's something that I've considered. Is I'm not doing that alone. I would need somebody to walk me through that whole process, because I would bring all kinds of past trauma and whatever. I feel like people should, at least for me, I feel like it's one of these things where you should maybe not go through a purification process per se, but maybe there is some inner work that would need done, just to make sure that you go into the experience with the intention of being able to learn and let go, and maybe have that support system afterward too, and not just do it flippantly like it's recreation. And I think that's an important thing to, I think, point out too, is when we're having these discussions, a lot of people still consider this taboo because it's, quote, drugs. And as opposed to looking at it like medicine, like plant medicine or a pharmaceutical even, or a treatment. And so I really think it's exciting, though, that now people are more open to this idea that these things should be researched and taken seriously as a way to use them to help people heal, because anything in a large quantity or the wrong quantity or in the wrong person's metabolism can go awry. So to be able to have this new frontier is just, no pun intended, but it's mind blowing.
Yeah, there is very powerful medical potential for a lot of these substances. I worked with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, for 5 years, and they're doing research to help with MDMA with post-traumatic stress disorder, with psilocybin with obsessive compulsive disorder, and with end-of-life anxiety, and with LSD is really helpful with people who have addiction problems. Ibogaine has also been used to help people stop addictions. So there really is. It's not just these incredible entity encounters, but they actually have powerful medical applications as well.
Something I'm really interested into is this extended stay idea. But how long has it been going on, and where is the research being published?
It's an Imperial College in London is where they're doing the extended state work. They've been doing it, I guess, for about 3 or 4 years now. It's been going on. They use a kind of IV drip, kind of like when you go into an anesthetic state during a surgery, so that you can stay in that state. Because the DMT experience, as powerful as it is very brief. It only lasts really around 10 minutes or so. It may feel a lot longer than those 10 minutes, but in terms of clock time, it's around 10, 15 minutes, and within 30 minutes, you're back to baseline. In these extended state studies that you're doing at Imperial College, and they're doing them also at the Medicinal Mindfulness in Colorado. There's research going on in Switzerland and in Holland as well. And they're putting people out there. The first studies they're doing right now are about an hour. They're putting people in for about an hour, but theoretically, you can put somebody in that state indefinitely for hours or longer, really, if there's. And what I'm really excited about is what kind of information can you bring back when you have extended conversations with these entities, and you're not being rushed back, and they teach us new forms of technology. Can people come back with ideas for matter transporters and time machines or starships or new
Right.
forms of energy? I mean, who knows? I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but I mean, it really is happening, that people are having these types of profound conversations with these beings. So I'm excited to see where it's headed.
Do you know by chance if they're having somebody like an artist or somebody who's also there to be able to maybe visualize, or are they just doing surveys or interviews, or do you know how they're collecting the data, or like how much data they're collecting around that in any of the studies?
Well, the people that are the subjects for their, I mean, it's like, like we've been discussing, it's a very, very, very intense experience. And people that they're using as subjects are people who have had prior experience, and people who also have some kind of, they feel comfortable enough going into these states, because most people it's, 15 minutes is plenty of time. And the idea of going into these states for longer. But I think they should, I think Sarah, they should use Sarah as a subject to
I
come.
agree.
She would be, I mean, you know.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
I don't know them specifically using artists. They're really,
Oh, I
looking
know.
for people.
I know
Oh,
the
you
You
do?
do.
answer to
There
this
you go.
question. I
Okay.
know the
Good.
answer. So there are a couple different organizations that are also creating extended state research in novel environments that take it outside of a clinical environment and more into like a retreat environment. One of those organizations is, I believe it's said Ulysses, is how we say it. Cool old Greek word. I'm going to butcher it. That's on me for not saying it right. But yeah, that's currently being organized. I feel, if I recall correctly, they're going to be doing that in February. They're going to be starting that stuff. And they're currently looking at systems to leverage language models to help people visualize their experience afterward. But that's still you know, in beta testing and being created and stuff. It hasn't been implemented yet, but I do know that there's major planning underway with them, as well as another organization that's collaborating to do extended state research, Nunautics, and they want to do something similar, although they're coming at it from different approaches. And so that's really exciting. There's other folks who are working to create engines in that way, sort of like API stringing different image generation softwares together. It is something that's pretty accessible to anybody. So, for the homegrown psychonaut, if you were to be utilizing things like Midjourney or Grok or ChatGPT, you can do the same thing that I did with the pipeline for the book. And that was taking trip reports. And in this case, we were taking trip reports from the research and creating what you call prompt craft and putting it into these engines to generate images. And I generated over 3,000 images for the book. Granted, a lot of that is on the proverbial scrap room floor or in my archives, and some of it made the cut and some of it didn't. And it was all highly processed. It was, very much collaged together and highly overpainted and curated. And it's one of the reasons why I went into so much depth in the book as far as the artist forward to describe the process so people understand that it's very much like a paintbrush for the collective consciousness, but that same process can be used by any individual. So you don't necessarily have to be an artist to be able to use that technology to give yourself, at this phase, it's kind of like a postcard or like one of those snapshots at the end of a roller coaster. But on a deeper level, it could be considered a research diagnostic tool, for cataloging people's experience. And once we get into even further territory where people are doing EEG, and I believe they're doing that with Ulysses. So getting like baseline and then experiential stuff. But they're by far not the only ones who are, the Imperial College London, they were putting people, in really sophisticated equipment to be able to monitor their brain waves. I think one participant was asked, like, would you do an MRI? And I think he declined just because of the nature of an MRI being
Mm.
so intense. But we're coming around the corner on being able to implement a lot of different tools. I know Zeus Tapato in Amsterdam is utilizing VR
Mm.
as well as a different kind of brain imaging technology. It's not EEG. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It escapes me right now, but just being able to see what parts of the brain are being stimulated in the experience, but also seeing if there's a way to create like a feedback loop with the VR with machine learning representing those brain states. So you, in a way, like in real time, can see what the brain is doing while in those places and kind of create like an entrainment thing. And so, for those who might be familiar with, there's a cute anime. It's very weird and surreal. It's called Paprika, and the plot revolves around a technology where you can record and share dreams. And it was actually the inspiration for Christopher Nolan's Inception in a lot of ways. But that kind of approach is really not that far off when it comes to dream states as well as DMT and other psychedelic states. So we might quite literally be able to pipe out the visuals directly at some point in the next 5 to 10 years.
Wow. I know there's a lot of research with the computer brain interfacing and all the different things that can go with that. But you mentioned Inception, and I have not seen that film, but I've been told 100 times past 2 weeks, you have to see this film, primarily because of this phenomenon that's going around. You may not have heard of it, but I thought I'd throw it out there and ask, have either of you heard of Mall World? Okay. Okay. So this is strange. You may want to look into it just because it has to do with lucid dreaming and shared consciousness. And it's something that a lot of younger people have been floating on TikTok. I think that's where let me take that back. I think it originated from a subreddit that then went viral a bit, or has been at least still on TikTok. And so there have been accounts of people maybe 50 plus, but a lot more of them have been like 40 and under, having these shared experiences that are quite weird, to say the least. But one individual, I think the New York Times was interviewing her for a story. So I think if you Google it, you might find some of this out there, but she was making a map of this. So they're calling it Mall World because in these dreams people are having, they share the same place. They're all going into the same place, and it happens to look like, to the best of their ability to describe it, a mall from maybe the 80s or something to that effect. But it's not just a mall. It's a mall, and it's attached to an airport, and it's very intricate, very specific. And people have been making maps of this and having these very specific shared dreams. And they're very strange because the things that people are having overlap with are like very strange and specific. So one of them being a dirty bathroom, that there's just stall after stall, broken stalls, and lots of toilets, and it's just dirty and sort of leaky and strange. And then that will be attached to, say, an airport or something that's underground a bit, a food court. They're all having these same experiences. And of course, they're little mass psychosis. I'm sure people are now getting on it and making up things, but there are a lot of really interesting accounts that are independent of that, and people are actually having a lot of difficulty with it. Some people have gone into psychosis over it, and it's been very disruptive to some people's lives because a lot of them thought this was only their dream. And it was interesting because I'm not really a person that has too many, I'm in this realm of say people who have had contact experiences, or I've even spoken to people who saw Bigfoot or whatever, but I'm not really an experiencer of anything like that. I just research. However, the reason I was taken by the small world thing was because I have had the same dreams, and I kind of understood the eeriness of it that people were describing in their accounts, which is not just the shared dream factor, but almost like the invasion of someone's private dream world. And these are recurring dreams people have had since childhood. Some of the people have now been researching and getting together, trying to figure out what are the similarities. Are there any demographic similarities? Some people have noted that a lot of the individuals who have these experiences came from the GATE program, the Gifted and Talented. Yeah. So, but a lot of that also could be just conjecture. Of course, people are trying and they're reaching for straws. So it's weird. It's weird, but I've been told that I should watch the movie Inception because of that. But I thought I'd throw that out there. It's a new thing that's going around, and it's really odd.
That is really, really interesting. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, because I really want to look into that, the mall world phenomena. Both Sara and I have both had a lot of experience with lucid dreaming. And when I was working on I did a book on lucid dreaming called Dreaming Wide Awake. And there's a whole chapter on shared dreaming experiences. And during the period when I was writing that book, my girlfriend and I did have a shared lucid dream after trying it. To have it for about a year, it finally happened, and it was very, very profound and interesting. And if you've been listening to the telepathy tapes, with the autistic children, they talk about the hill.
The hill,
where they all kind of meet, in this kind of telepathic communicating realm. The research that they're doing at Imperial College right now is they're sending people on DMT out together. They're sending them out in teams because people report, having, shared experiences in these hyperdimensional realms. And they're trying to actually verify, these experiences to see if there's really some kind of objective reality to that. But I find that phenomena so interesting and really appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I'm definitely going to look into the
Please
mole world
do.
phenomena.
I would love to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts, given your background and your understanding of the situation. The hill in particular, that was something some people have brought up too in their, chasing theories, because in these shared dreams, there is a very big hill and it's very much similar to the things that have been described. But it's, yeah, I'll send you some information that I have on it if you'd like. You can also, I'm sure, Google it now. It's been really popular the past probably month at best, but there's a whole subreddit devoted to it. And it's so strange. And it's one of the only things that really just, it had me very emotional, actually. I'm not a very visual. I'm more of a sound person, audible hallucinations, even before bed, that sort of thing. Like I play many musical instruments. And so I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm a person with aphantasia, but I just don't have that strong mind's eye. And so to me, having that lucid dream is just, I have a rich dream life, and it's just been really, it's been something, but it's just been a personal thing. And I never thought that I would hear other people say the same thing, but then seeing the same places and having the same narrative and the same lucidity. And it's just been a little unsettling. So weird. Don't know where to go with that even, because I think I'm too close to it to research it. I've just sort of put it out there because these aren't archetypes in that sense that we could look at, say, the gray or these shapes. These are very, almost just very contemporary things that people are reporting. Airports, parking lots, very specific though. Tsunami on the, like, if you're going up this supposed hill, that's this road. There on the left side of it is almost like an ocean and a tsunami's coming. There's a war in the sky. There's very specific keynotes to this. People have made maps of these places to try to, again, put a visual component to it. So it would be interesting to see, what, just be interesting. I don't know. I'm not a visual person, which is why I appreciated your book too, because I would love to imagine all of these things, but just to be able to see at least some sort of visual representation is very important for people who maybe don't have a strong mind's eye.
Yeah, I would check out the back rooms too. It might be adjacent to the mall world phenomenon.
Do you find one entity class more interesting or promising for research than the other?
I mean, I think just for the sake of them being more common, that the jesters and the machine elves. And I also think that, getting outside of the pattern collapse that I mentioned earlier and just sort of being able to see them from a raw data visual perspective, I think the contemporary nature of the machine elves is really interesting because when we think about elves, we don't really think about machines, right? And even, machine is kind of, I don't know, just like grasping at straws in a way. It's just our way of describing something that seems maybe potentially non-organic or intricate or technological, right? And so that's the word we land on. But I think because of the contemporary nature of it being at the very edge of what we can describe and grasp, but it's still having this like impish, mischievous, energetic quality that is similar to harlequins or clowns. And I mean, you probably heard of this guy's work. I don't necessarily like his take because I think that he's sort of seeing it from a biased perspective, but there's a gentleman out there who hypothesizes that all of the clown motif from human history is reminiscent of, the Nephilim, which I found kind of interesting. But just that uncanny quality, the exaggeration of features, the unnatural coloring, the mischievous, jovial nature of it. And I mean, for me, when I first encountered that class of entity, I came from a background being one of those people afraid of clowns, Stephen King's It, way too little to see it. But I came in with a background noise fear of clowns, but they didn't really manifest so much as clowns. They looked like jeweled acrobats and harlequins. And that was really beautiful and intriguing. And I was like, oh, cool. But then in retrospect, I was like, wow, they were really clown-like. Let's be real. But I think that the ability of those two categories to kind of be transcendent of the pattern collapse, it gives it a little bit more elbow room that I find interesting in ways to potentially define them more on their terms rather than falling back to familiar things that human beings have been describing throughout human history in different ways.
You know, when I interviewed Graham Hancock for my book, he suggested that the entities that look like clowns, that they've been encountered throughout history, and that's the reason that we actually have clowns in our world. It's not the other way around. It's not like they look, you know, it's not like our clowns, they're imitating our clowns, but we're imitating them. Which I thought was a really intriguing idea. Also, I wanted, now that I've given a little bit more thought about what types of entities would be the most conductive to research with, were those that seem to have a teaching quality, that those that, you know, that seem to want it, you know, rather than those that are mischievous or sort of playing with us, that have more of a sort of teaching quality to us than like say the octopoid beings tend to try to impart knowledge or trying to send us information rather than just trying to have a sort of sense of humor that's hard for us to understand sometimes.
I'm asking because I'm interested in doing a little research into that historical component, looking at those images and seeing like, well, you know, like Graham Hancock said, like it probably is that we have been using those things as ways to understand, and that we're not actually dreaming of clowns perhaps, but that we have brought that into our material world based on our internal experiences. There's a lot of things are like that anyway. So if you look at a lot of the different art from the past, it just, a lot of it like Mandela's and different sort of beings. I mean, it just, in my view, it seems like it's a lot of people's efforts over the years to express that inner world. And then they do have these similar patterns. And I just don't think that's a consequence of our limited human brain or a consequence of just limited creativity, or that everyone eventually will draw these sorts of things. I personally don't believe that. I think that they are pulling from something else that's very, I guess, a collective conscious point of view. And so I think it's very fascinating when people have the art that people have described when they've been on these trip reports, and it does sometimes resemble these ancient deities and that sort of thing. So I could speak to you all day on those. I'm just really fascinated, and especially given my look into the Anunnaki in particular. I don't think enough's been done on that. The Anunnaki have been researched ad nauseum at this point, but I don't think in the ways that matter most. And that's something that I strive to do moving forward a lot more of, is looking into their art more specifically and trying to look for that. You can see a lot of that recursive pattern and a lot of that in their art to begin with. But I think that a good place to start would be looking in their medical texts and healing medicines. There's a lot of recipes. I think the British Museum has over 660 medical texts that describe different medicines, plant uses, and it's very extensive. So I have a feeling that maybe looking back in that direction, we may find some interesting connections there as well.
Yeah, well, there's certainly the visual motifs that recur on psilocybin are you see them in Aztec and Mayan artwork. And I think they come from the psychedelic experience first. And that's why we see them there. But you're doing such wonderful work, Heather, really. We're looking so forward to your new book to see the relationship between the Anunnaki and altered states of consciousness, because I think there really is a very powerful connection that really hasn't been explored.
I appreciate that. And I will definitely send you both a copy, and I would really love to hear your
Thank you.
feedback on that. And so if you run across any interesting Sumerian, Mesopotamian, Anunnaki oriented, whether it's research or visuals too, it feels like sometimes the Sumerians have been overlooked in that regard, and we jump right to, say, ancient Egypt. And so I'm trying to go all the way back and mine that for more information. And there's more actually tablets available to research than there are Egyptian papyri. And we should be able to find something, I think, if we just continue to research. So that's what I plan to do. But thankfully, you guys are making it so much easier for people to open their minds to the possibility of other entities, other realities, and being able to even possibly partake in that communication through responsible plant medicine. And it's so amazing. And I'm so glad to have you on. And thank you so much for sharing everything with everybody. If they were wanting to know more about your work, David, where could people find you to read all your books? You have many amazing books. You're really a pioneer in this. I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times, but it is true. You are actually a pioneer in this. And so
Thank you.
where
Thank
can
you.
people find you?
Well, first of all, this is the latest book that we've been talking about. Yeah, I've written 19 books. You can find them all on Amazon. I have an author page. I have a website, www.davidjbrown.com, Jay, my middle name, not just the initial. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram. I'm all over social media. And yeah, and I respond to, communications from people very readily. I'm happy to talk to anybody about their experiences.
That's so great. And Sara, where can people find you and your beautiful art and your amazing thoughts? I could just talk to you forever. I'm so glad you were able to make it today too.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for extending the invitation to me. You can find me on Instagram as far as social media goes. My handle is currently dreamseed_VR. That's also the name of my YouTube channel. I have an archive of videos from the past few years, and I'm going to be rebooting the channel in the next few months. And then in the meantime, yeah, I also have a Substack that I've been doing a lot of writing on the past year or so. So I think I have close to 50 or so articles that I've shared and written over that past year's time on a lot of technology, ethics, a lot of philosophy, a lot of visionary art culture stuff as well. But yeah, as far as the art goes, I post a lot on Instagram in that regard. And I'm also rebuilding my website. The name is to be refurbished, and I'll announce that on my Instagram. But I also love hearing from people, as David does. I'm very open to communication on Instagram. So yeah, that would probably be the easiest way if people wanted to reach out and learn more about my art.
Awesome. Well, I'll have all those links below too so that people can find you and all your great work. And thank you so much for coming on again. And I hope that you'll come back because I have so many questions. And
Absolutely.
I still want to pick your brain a little bit on my own possible journey one day. So we'll stay in touch for that.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Definitely. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Heather. It's really
Thank
been a
you.
joy.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Blessings.